idea of D&D and
Alright,
anime.
character creation. So, with character creation, the first thing that I'm going to talk about is motivation and goals. And as we were just talking about with Dungeons and Dragons, this is actually a very pivotal thing with Dungeons and Dragons, so it's kind of funny.
Do they want to avenge the dead brother, or do they want to kill the dead brother?
I want to kill the social worker that actually
Somebody's dead.
That's fair.
It's necromancy, obviously.
Okay, hold on. So, the motivations and goals. So, motivations are pretty simple, but I still feel the need to talk about it. This is when you say, hey, because of X happening in my past, I am motivated to do Y. So, for example, me as an editor, I recently have been, my motivation, if I was doing a character based off of myself, my motivation recently to make a fundraiser for authors who typically can't afford editing because they're independently published and don't have the money, I made a fundraiser because I thought that would be a great idea and a great way to help independently published authors, because a lot of independently published authors either just fork out the insane amounts of cash or they generally don't get an editor. And I don't think that's fair. I think that they should have just as much right to an editor.
Agreed.
So I'm doing a fundraiser. My motivation for that, though, is because when I was working for a traditional publishing house, love Monster Ivy, they were absolutely fabulous, but I realized that it is so incredibly hard to get published. There was a novel that I absolutely adored, and I was helping them approve and reject novels, and I was like, I think we should do this. Like, this is so cool. It actually made me like horror, and I hate horror. I don't like horror at all, and I liked it. It was just good writing. The only problem was they were right. It had a few plot holes later on in the story, and it had a few character flaws later on in the story that were pretty large. It wasn't like good character flaws. It was like the character would never do this, so why did they do this character flaws? And those things are a lot harder to fix. And as a result, they got rejected, which made me so freaking depressed. And so I realized that a lot of people independently publish because they can't find a publisher because they don't even know what's wrong with the book. They're getting rejected for plot holes and character flaws that they don't even know are there because they just get rejected and they don't say why. And so as a result, I did tell them why because I was allowed to write the rejection letter. But most rejection letters don't tell you
You're
why.
writing as like,
It's beautiful, but also
you're like, I love it, but also it's not the best.
But also we need to fix a few things. Yes, so my motivations for doing the fundraiser came from that. Came from saying, hey, everyone deserves to be published if you want to tell your story. So if you want to independently publish, you have just as much of a right to have an editor. Hence my motivation. My goal is obviously to fundraise the money so that way I can give more free editing service, raise the funds, to give more free editing services to people who need it and can't typically afford it. So a motivation is where the goal comes from. The goal is obviously where you want to get through those motivations. Oftentimes it dictates your other actions too. For example, I have done a ton of sales for random reasons. I'm like, oh, it's a holiday, 20% off. Because I'm just desperate to try and give people discounts so they can have an editor. I'm desperate to try and help people. I really want to help people.
Like, I want to do this for you, but I also need to eat.
Exactly. I'm like, please, I really want to help you. So as a result, with motivations and goals is what they want to ultimately reach, but motivations is what causes them to act the way they do along the way. So for example, with motivations, if we were doing a character and their goal was to defeat the evil wizard lord, then their motivations might be like, I need to train, I need to do this, and I'm going to ignore everything else about my life to just train and get harder and work harder. Yes, so it's like, there you go. So there's all sorts of different things you can do, but the motivation generally moves in the same direction as the goal, even if it takes side roads, even if it has hard times, even if it has ups and downs. It at least moves in the same direction. That's why character flaws, you have to align with the character. And when I say align with the character, I mean like, if they naturally are kind of like, they have trouble with being frustrated with people or being a know-it-all like Hermione or things like that, you know, it kind of gives them an endearing quality to be flawed. But if you're like, oh, their motivation is to kill the evil wizard lord, but they refuse to work for it.
That makes no sense.
That makes no sense. It's like, okay, why? Now if you explained that like they have some sort of problem that's interfering, like they can't learn magic because, I don't know, because they're guys, only women can
Because
learn
they're
magic.
human, but then they find bliss magic.
Exactly, so or something like that.
Yes.
Yes.
Because their mind is this big.
Because your brain is this big, and to defeat wizard you need brain this big. So yeah, no, there's got to be something standing in their way in order to have that be an acceptable character flaw. All right, moving on to the next point. Now this is one of the trickiest ones. Voice. With character voice, this is going to change also based on what point of view you're doing, and based on, oh come on, thingy. First person, second person, third person, that thing.
Person sucks. It hurts my brain.
So basically, with
Second.
voice,
It makes no sense.
it's going to change based on what you're doing. So for example, I actually had this happen recently where I was trying to write a gothic novel. And I always, lots of emphasis on always, have written novels in third person past tense. I don't know any other way.
Like,
It's just what I do. Third person past tense limited. That's just my style. And I kept trying to write this gothic novel that way, and I'm like, I'm not feeling it. It's just not working. And then the other day I randomly, for no apparent reason, was like, I'm inspired to try to write this in first person present.
oh boy.
Totally different from what I normally do. Not even close to what I normally do. But it actually felt better. Why? Because that's the voice that was needed for the story. Before I was trying to like make it creepy and usual like gothic type vibes, but the gothicness wasn't being felt because it didn't feel real because there was this detachment by using third person, even with limit. Whereas when I use first person present, you are in the moment, living and hearing about her life. And so it feels much more riveting, much more real, much more spooky. And so it gave a different voice. Now, when I also say voice, I don't just mean first person, third person, etc. Though that does help, like I was just talking about. Whether it's past, present, limited, omniscient, all those things helps. And sometimes, depending on what story you're trying to tell, it's going to be different types of things. True. But voice is also about how they talk. This is important for individual characters. If you have a singular character, let's say their name is David, and he talks like a cowboy, and he be the best cowboy. That's okay. But then you need to have some dissonance. You can't have everyone talking like that, right? You need to have some people who are different. You need to have the proper lady who's like, you used the wrong word, and things like that. You need to have people who feel different, you know?
But it would be funny if they all talked the same.
It would be funny, except
You
then
could
you
have-
couldn't tell
You
anyone
could
apart.
have the janky hillbilly accent and then like the southern rich guy accent.
Yes, exactly. You can have subtle differences, or you can even have differences where like a lot of them sound the same, but they still sound different. For example, if two kids both grew up in American Fork, Utah, and lived right next to each other, their experiences are still going to dictate how they talk, right? If one loves math, they might never they might never really talk. And so as a result, when they talk, they're like, do I really care about English word order? Not really. You know, like, I care about math. I care about logic. I don't care about your stupid, weird, literary stuff. Whereas if the person next door grew up reading Jane Austen and grew up reading all of these fancy
Charles
Regency romance
Dickens.
novels, Charles Dickens, wow.
Charles Dictionary.
I'm
You just
sorry.
turned into every theater director ever.
Charles Dictionary.
All right. So that being said, my point is that it's going to give them a very different stylistic of speaking, right? It doesn't matter that they grow up in the same household. It doesn't matter that they, in fact, they even have to go to the same school, have the same religion, have the same teachers. They can have the same everything. And if they're unique individuals, they will not be the same person. They just won't be.
What if they're the exact same person?
Then they will have the
Then
same.
in that case, we're getting into cloning, and that's more complicated.
And that's a sci-fi.
And even then, there's debates if clones would truly be like the original, especially because there's actually attempts at cloning, And there was this one, I believe it was a bull, that was like really, really sweet, really, really tender and soft. And so they were like, why don't we try to clone it? And the clone was a raging, crazy bull. The classic, like, ready to murder everyone. And yet it was the same exact genes. So it's debatable even with cloning. I don't know. You'd have to do some sort of magic-y hoodoo stuff, I think, to have the same character be exactly the same.
I'm just like using that, like especially like if it gets closer to Halloween.
The hoodoo thing. Yes, I agree. You could theoretically have two characters that are the same, but in that case, I'd have to have some sort of magic or scientific explanation.
Or they could just be twins. Like in those horror films, those creepy twins.
That's fair, but have you ever met identical twins? They're actually not that much alike.
I have.
Yeah, I've met twins. Not
The only reason I say that is because I had two identical twins in one of my Latin classes, and it was actually hilarious because our Latin teacher could actually tell them apart better than he could tell me and my friend apart, and we're not related at all.
You're like,
that's funny.
Yeah, granted, I mean, we're both blonde and have glasses, but like that's where the similarities pretty much stop. So that being said, conflict. Oh boy, the marker's doing it again. There it is. Apparently, it's just one side of the marker works and the other one doesn't. So,
I don't like when markers do that.
with conflict, you want to make sure there's conflict with your character. They can't be perfect. They can't be like, well, my motivation is to kill the wizard, therefore I will learn this fancy spell and immediately go kill the wizard. That is called that is called a 3-chapter, really boring book for 5-year-olds.
Yeah.
Like
Very much.
very simple, and nothing's wrong with that.
So
Nothing's
what you're
wrong with
saying is we have to torture our characters.
Yes.
Got it.
Not necessarily.
Oh,
Technically we kind of do.
So yes.
Avoid Mary Janes. So Mary
Yes.
Janes are an internet thing where it's
Oh yeah.
you give usually a feminine character every single good attribute. She's kind and popular
Yep.
and blah blah blah
Yep.
blah. Just don't do that.
Mary Jane and Marty Stew, I believe are the terms.
Marty Stew is
So
the
my
G.
main character
Yeah,
is
Marty Stew's
she's
Stew.
nowhere popular.
Yeah. So yeah, Marty Stew's the dude version. But yeah, so it's funny because it goes both ways. It's funny because Marty Stew actually came first, but that's mainly because we live in a primarily masculine society. And then when when the feminists came along and were like, "Nuh-uh, we ain't having that," they did the opposite problem and we're like, "Now we're gonna make the women perfect," and it's like, no, both of those don't work.
These aren't relatable and you want relatable.
Exactly, you want them to be
But I am
relatable.
debating to make a character who thinks she's perfect, but she's just
The
a
worst.
diva.
No, that's valid. That's valid. There are people like that who think that they are perfect, genuinely, but they're just the worst. But with that being said, conflict can mold your character, and it does really show you who a person is, how they react to conflict. Because we all react to conflict very differently. Like, for example, hopefully, all of you have been lucky enough to not have this experience. But if you've ever had someone really, really close to you perish, die, leave you. Everyone grieves in a different way, you'll notice. Everyone who was close to that person will all treat it very differently. They'll all not be the same afterwards, and it'll all be in different ways. Some people might just blow it off, some people might not be able to continue functioning, some people might just bury their grief and be like, I'm fine. And they're not fine. Has anyone seen the Spider-Verse movie? No spoilers, I'm just saying, one of the characters does not know how to deal with their emotions.
Oh god, yes. Let me guess. He died.
So, anyway, so people don't know how to deal with their emotions sometimes, and that's okay. We all don't know how to deal with our emotions. I have trouble dealing with my emotions. You guys probably have trouble dealing with your emotions. Emotions are hard.
I've actually had experience where someone close to me did pass away. It was when I was in grade school.
Yeah.
Our librarian died, which
Oh.
on Halloween, but my mom
Yeah.
said it was probably weird because he loved children.
Aw.
And so anyway, everyone reacted so differently.
Yeah, no, that's true.
When I found out at home, I cried, but at school, I'm like, what is happening?
No, it's true. Everyone reacts so differently when it comes to grief. Everyone's grief looks different. No one's grief is the same. And it's the same thing with mental health and all sorts of other things. So with conflict, if you're going to give your character self-esteem issues, if you're going to give your character anxiety, if you're going to give your character a grief
Or trauma.
realize that you can't do it the exact same as everyone else. If you read a novel where someone did X, Y, and Z, don't do that. Do your own thing, because the characters are going to be distinctly unique. Sure, they might be similar, they might have similar traits. Like, for example, a lot of people with depression tend to struggle with feeling they're worthy, to feel that they're, want to keep going because it's just so hard. Like, that's a stereotypical depression thing, but then it manifests in underlying ways. Do they decide to take care of themselves because other people care? Or do they purposely not do that because they desperately are trying to get people to notice that they're not fine? Like, everyone's going to be slightly different. So I would say, especially if you're going to do conflict being mental health, do a lot of research and talk to a lot of people who have that mental health. Not just one person, at least 5, if not more. Just to get different points of view.
If you're a person with
Yeah.
mental health?
Then I would say writing from your own experience is definitely a good way to do things, but at the same time still talk to a few other people because they're going to interpret it differently than you are. For example, I don't think I'm technically not been formally diagnosed, but I know enough therapists in my family that I technically have been. I have ADHD. But my ADHD is distinctly different from my 3 friends' ADHD. So I talk to them and they're all different, they're all unique. Yes, hello, Eliora.
So, if you were writing like an autobiography
Yes.
about yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and you have like mental health issues,
Yes, absolutely. Like my ADHD and my anxiety.
do you think it would still be helpful to get other resources, like information from other resources? To
It
say, like,
depends.
this is kind of how it works.
It depends on what type of autobiography you're doing. If you're just doing your life, then you talk about your experience. However, if you're doing an autobiography saying like, I'm trying to spread the word about X mental illness, then maybe talk to other people because you're trying to get a comprehensive scope, not just yours. Whereas if you're just doing yours, just talk about it. So that's my personal opinion. It depends on what type of autobiography you're doing. That's a great question though. That's a really good question. All right, let's see. Next one. Let's see. Oh no. Oh no. The marker's dead.
Again.
Now we
Girlie,
have
you need to fundraise for new markers. is what
Yes.
you need to
Technically we have some. I just didn't want to go grab them this time. Well, technically I did. I grabbed them the last couple times. So, the reason this is important is because a lot of people are like, I am 12 and I have blonde hair and I love to ice skate.
And what about
Exactly. It doesn't get you invested if you just tell them, I do, etc. And tell them about yourself. Well, let's see you ice skate. Do you ice skate until you're freaking, like, is she
Toes
ice
fall
skating?
off.
Well, I was going to say blisters.
What?
Yeah. Basically, she's ice skating and it's so beautiful and it's so gorgeous and you can tell she's so invested. But then she goes
She's
to get off the
12.
rink and she pulls off her skate and her feet are bloodied with blisters because she just skated way too long.
That's concerning.
Yes, exactly.
Tell me
That-
this
that's
is
causing
hospital.
That tells you a lot about the character, though, doesn't it? Either she's dedicated, or for some reason she likes ice
She's
skating,
being crazy.
or she's crazy.
or her parents are pressuring her to be
Or her
perfect,
parents
so
are
she's
pressuring her to be
she's
perfect.
practicing for hours or else she's
Exactly. It gives a lot of depth to the character, and especially because then instead of saying, "and my parents are pressuring me to be perfect," it shows that, and then you can show that even more to solidify that aspect later. Like she goes home and she's like, "Hi, Mom," and Mom's like, "Did you get that perfect pen on today's score?" And it's like, "Oh no," like I don't know.
Oh.
Like you can show how that is being there instead of just saying it. It gives more depth if you show your characters in action what they're doing and how they're feeling. Especially because we, in real life, the stories we see on television aren't fully real. They're glamorized most of the time, or blown up depending on if they're trying to villainize someone.
Wait, did you just say blown up?
Yes, because it's blown up. It's blown out of proportion.
Oh, I thought the character was blown up.
No,
That made me worried.
So it all depends. But this is why we show things, is because we only know our experience, right? So the best way to tell a story is to show other people what this experience is like. Show and demonstrate it. Don't just tell us how it feels. Let us feel it vicariously through them. And do it slowly. Don't do it all at once. Don't be like, here's all of my trauma on page 1. Give it slow. Give it time. Give it give it ability to marinate. It's kind of like a good, I'm gonna use the example of soup. When people make soup, they typically say, and this has been proven on many cooking shows, that you have to at least boil all the ingredients and stuff for at least 4 hours to get optimal flavor. Yeah. Oh yeah. Seriously, it's been proven multiple times.
But what that's pathetic. Like soup. I don't have the time or attention span for 4 hour soup. I have canned soup.
And
You just walk it all there and leave for 4 hours.
So the whole thing is that it's similar in the regard that if you want your characters to truly have the same vibrancy that other characters have, what you're gonna want is you're gonna want to show it slowly. You don't want this is where my thing comes into play. You don't want to take a bunch of carrots and a bunch of celery and some noodles and a tiny bit of roast chicken, toss it in some water and put it in the microwave. That ain't gonna taste like soup. That's just gonna taste like sad.
It really does. I tried that when I was little. It was gross.
Exactly. Whereas if you let it simmer and sit there for 4 hours and marinate in all those different flavors, it's going to be beautiful soup at the end. And it's the same thing with your characters. You need to let your readers marinate in that story and be able to just fully
4 hours.
Immerse themselves like
immerse
the
for 4
carrots.
hours in the carrots of your characters. That was a terrible metaphor at the end. But point being that you can't microwave your characters and be like, done.
Like the turtles in Barbie, they look microwave.
Yeah, you need to be able to make sure that they have more. All right,
Unless they're just sort of non-named characters.
that's true. Unless they're a side character, in which case it's slightly more.
like
Like Lavender Brown.
looks microwave.
Yes, like Lavender
Barely
Brown.
made.
She's barely a character. You could barely even count her. You know, maybe through things better. Yeah, that's okay. Perfectly. I completely agree. Lavender Brown's a great example of that. All right. Okay, so looks, I should say. This is actually very important. This is what I don't think other people call it that, but I call it this because this is what I have trouble with. Blob character syndrome. The reason I call it blob character syndrome, I need to sit down. I'm getting tired. Blob character syndrome. Now the reason I call it blob character syndrome is because if you don't give us a description of your character, they're going to be a blob in our head, or we're going to imagine them incorrectly. And by incorrectly, I mean it's just not going to look like what you want it to look like. So for example, you might have a character who has curly red hair and blue eyes, but if you don't tell me that, I might imagine them as African American. You don't know. What if I'm just like, she's giving off African American vibes? There was one time where I was reading a first person story that did not make it clear that they were a male until page 5. And so I was sitting there going, yeah, this is one awesome girl, and then all of a sudden I'm like, that's a dude.
It's like, wow, look at that man, he got feminine hips.
And I'm like, all right then.
Like, well then, good for you, I guess. Nice privilege.
No, yeah, but this is why I think people need an editor, because I don't even think they realize things like that. I don't, certainly. There are lots of things.
I'm not like, why didn't your editor?
5 pages is too much.
It's too much, but that's the thing. They didn't even realize that they hadn't mentioned gender until that page. And I'm like, you need to mention gender before then, and if it's first person, because otherwise we have no idea. Give us some indication. Even if they have no gender, even if they're non-binary or gender fluid, you need to make sure that you indicate that. Otherwise, we're gonna have no idea. And we need to know these things. Similar thing with name. If you're doing a first-person story, you need to make sure that the name of the first-person character is mentioned somewhere on the first page.
I'm confused by that. I think sometimes, like, with...
Yes.
No, I read this book. Have you read the book Cursed?
I have not.
Well, anyway, the writer switches the point of view all the time.
Oh no.
Different people on the scene.
Oh no.
And it's a Netflix series now. I'm like, how? I don't understand what's going on. It made me so mad.
Ouch. Yeah, that happens
I want to
sometimes.
read that book just to see how
Just to
bad
see
it
how
is.
It's
So with looks, you want to make sure that you describe your character and give us a name in the first page. Preferably in the first paragraph, but in the first page at minimum.
What about show not tell? We have to set up for show not tell.
Yes, absolutely, you have to set up for show not tell, but you can still do it with showing not telling. For example, with the ice skating example, you can have her black hair flowing in the wind as she's ice skating. That's
No
still
way down
showing.
an ice rink.
Well, Maybe she's outside.
How about she was going so fast her hair was whipping across her face?
There you go. See?
The black hair.
This is a way to show. This is a way to show and not tell. So thank you for asking that question. That is a good point. I think a lot of people feel like they have to tell because of the fact that they feel like there's no way. But there is ways to do it within the first couple paragraphs. Absolutely.
It just feels complicated.
It's easiest with action starts, I think.
Yes, it's easier when action starts. However, let me tell you right now, best first chapters start with some sort of drama or action. If you're not starting with drama or action, you're gonna lose your reader real
Oh
quick.
my gosh, if it's no drama or action, first page, I'll read a page
Exactly.
and be like,
I'm done.
out.
I'm done. Most readers, it's actually been scientifically proven, most readers don't read beyond the first paragraph. If they're not enticed by the first paragraph, they're out. That's why you need drama and action to help reel them in. And it doesn't have to be like punching each other in the face action. It's like the ice skating. That's still action. It's movement. It gives you character movement. Yes, you had a question.
What if I want to confuse my reader and have the character just be a vlog?
If you want
Yes.
Untrustworthy narrators are so
Yes.
annoying, but also
very fun.
hilarious.
Very cool. If
Yeah.
you want to do an untrustworthy narrator, then I would definitely say do that. I wouldn't say do first person because then it's just going to bump the reader. If you're going to do third person, just make sure that it's an untrustworthy narrator. That you're constantly be like, what is the narrator telling me? Is it even true? Then
like
in that case,
question the reality.
questioning reality. Yes, absolutely. Then I would say that works. But I wouldn't say do it in first person just because that's going to just drive the reader insane.
It's sort of like when Alcatraz in
Yes.
the second book
Yes.
is just like,
You
when
can't
he's
trust
just
him.
like, I'm a fish.
Yep, and you're like, yeah, no, that's exactly. Exactly. So if you're going to do stuff like that, you just have to have a narrator that absolutely no one can trust. You're constantly questioning your reality because you're like, I don't know, this person's not trustworthy and yet you're telling me a story.
But
Alright, so yes, that being said, you need to make sure the looks and the name are shown somewhere in the first paragraph to first page. That's why I say to first page, because I want you to show, not tell. So within the first page is okay. Anywhere beyond the first page, and it
Stop
starts breaking the spell of the reader. It starts making the reader go, huh? What? What just happened? And they're broken out of this spell that they've been put on here by the reader. So, alright, I'm gonna stand up. Alright. Okay. Next is
bonjour.
so you can also develop your characters more through secondary characters.
We're just talking about dating right
So-
now, basically. No, we're not. We're talking about how the heck do you create a decent character without losing your reader. It's
Yep.
very difficult.
It is very difficult.
Dean,
So-
No, it's not how it works.
So this is why secondary characters are so important, is because it really helps with the show not tell principle. Why? Because if they're a character who's never met them before, they're gonna ask a lot of questions, probably, right? You know, when you first get to know someone, you're not like, I know that you like clam chowder is your favorite soup or whatever. Like you just know.
Lobster
You don't know
bisque.
that. Or exactly, lobster bisque. They had to ask a lot of questions before they figured that out, right?
Yeah.
So then generally if you just met someone, whereas if everyone else in that restaurant probably has met him before and knows. Fully aware, right?
The audience knows.
The audience knows.
When he,
Exactly.
the moment he walks on stage, lobster bisque.
Exactly. But that's because we know him. So that can also tell a lot of people about the person, right? If they know you. If you're new, then it can help ask questions. If they're not a new secondary character, it can help you get to know them through what they're doing. So for example, if the person has anxiety and the person just met this person and they're like, I can't do it, and they're like, why? I don't understand, it's easy. That's because they don't know that the other person has anxiety yet, right? Whereas if the person's known them for a long time, they might be like rubbing their back, trying to comfort them, be like, you can do this, you got this.
die if you do, at least I don't say.
Exactly. And so it's like, it's just shows the character. The same thing can be shown through characters that are either very close to the person or new to getting to know the person. Secondary characters are incredibly valuable for being able to demonstrate, and especially because relationships are something that we as humans actually need. I know, some of us introverts are like, gross, what do you mean we need relationships? But It's true.
I'm sorry, you have to interact with other humans.
We as humans, yes, we are pack animals. We like to be with other humans. We like to interact with other humans. Even if we're introverts, we secretly like humans. Even if we all are like,
No
gross,
animals
don't
are
like
better.
humans, and then the second we're alone, we're like, I miss my humans. So, or at least that's all the introverts I've met. So, let me know if you met a true introvert where they're just like, I want to live in the woods with my cats and my trees.
I would like to do that. I like
other
other people,
So
but
boring.
But see, this is where
Okay,
different
then
people.
tell
And go get on the internet and make
Okay,
fun of
tigers
people.
would be interesting.
All right. So that being said,
Okay, return to the story.
so secondary
Yeah.
characters can really help us get to know someone because we as people interact with other humans. And so seeing how a character interacts with other humans, other beings, other creatures is going to tell us a lot about them. For example, even a secondary character as an animal can tell us a lot about a person. If they're, let's say you walk into a room and you see a person with a dog and they're petting the dog and they're like, who's a good boy? And they're just so happy. That tells you a lot about they like dogs, they treat dogs well. What if they walk into that same room and the dog is starving to death and they kick it? They're probably a villain. They're probably a villain.
Especially if they have high cheekbones.
Like, they're probably a villain, 100%.
if someone wrote that, then the offer's the true villain.
They're probably a villain. But yeah, funny story, that's actually a secret trick. They actually did a research study seeing what makes people think they're truly evil. Yeah, they could do all the evil things in the world, but the second they kick a dog or an innocent animal, they're the worst. I don't know why. It's scale of they murdered women and children to they kicked a dog. I don't know why. But it's
Like, if you're taking my cat, I'm gonna kick your face.
Exactly. And see, that can also tell you a different thing about whether they're a cat person or a dog person. You want to know why? Because typically, people who like cats, it's because of the fact that they like to feel independent. They like to feel like the creature doesn't actually need them. That secretly they do love that creature and they need that creature. Whereas if they're a dog person, they need to feel the reassurance of wanting to be loved all the time.
What if
Yes.
your character doesn't have a dog or a cat, but it's
Secondary
an
character.
Give them one.
Well, in that case,
Or to
I would
not.
say it depends on what they're closest to. I would say because they're foxes, they tend to be closer towards dogs.
Really?
They are. They are technically considered closer to the canine family, and they act more like dogs when you domesticate
Who?
them. Foxes. Because I've read her story and it has foxes. Yes. They have some cat-like attributes, but it's primarily foxes. Yes.
What if I make the motivation for the character that the villain hunted their dog?
Yeah. You totally could do that. Actually.
Yes.
Just have to be an animal activist. How
Like-
dare you touch a dog?
Not a vegan. Yeah, must perish.
Yeah, but anyway, so funny thing about foxes, I actually watched some on Instagram, where they rescued foxes and have rehabilitated them, and as a result, most of them act, I would say 80% like dogs. They have some cat-like attributes, but it's primarily dog-like attributes. They love to be loved, they love to be petted, they love to be snuggled, they love attention. One of them loves
This is
freaking
why I
crawling on
need
the
a
other one's
pet
shoulders.
fox.
So they're actually very snuggly creatures if you raise them from infancy. Clarification there.
That's why I can never get the foxes in the woods to follow.
Yes, but what is the fox?
Well, I don't know. That's one time I
Just
get them to
goes
follow
into
me.
the woods, hugs a fox.
Well, laws
Right.
prevent me from having a fox, and
That depends on the state.
yeah, it's true.
No, it's true. The person
And
that I'm talking about
Utah
isn't.
doesn't allow
Yeah.
foxes.
No, yeah. Which is unfortunate because yeah, it would be nice. To
Just
be able
move
to-
That could be like Talbot.
All right. So, round versus flat characters. You guys have probably heard this from English class. However, I'm going to talk about this because I think that it's important, regardless of English class making it boring. Because it's actually not a boring topic if you talk about it right. So, round characters. This is when you do all the things we've been talking about. They're fully developed. You make it so that they feel real. So if they were to step out of the pages, you'd feel like they were perfectly tangible and it would make sense. Whereas if Lavender Brown were to step out of the pages, you'd be like, cardboard cutout, there's no way this is real,
Like
shove.
art, like yeah, Lavender Brown's
Harry,
like
Harry Potter, Ron.
I've not read Harry Potter
Gotcha.
since the second grade.
Yeah,
okay,
it's
pretty
okay.
much she's basically her entire thing is she's Ron's girlfriend for like half of the sixth book,
Yep.
and that's all she is.
I
It's
believe
her
that. I
vocabulary.
haven't read the books since like the second grade.
Yeah, no, you're all good. It was
Please.
just a good example because we talked about it before you came in. So we were talking about black characters.
Also, you can have a fox in Utah. You don't even need a permit. Red foxes, yeah.
Huh, interesting. Fancy. All right.
You're like, I don't know
Good to know.
legally.
You would call my parents saying, why did you put the idea of
You don't
boxes
have
in
my
your doors?"
number. Nobody here has my number. You can't contact
Anyway,
me.
so with round
When the
versus
world
flat
doesn't work.
characters, you can actually use flat characters to your benefit, like lavender brown. Or there's other examples.
That's just like non-important, but still named characters.
But still named characters, but also they do have importance. If it wasn't for Lavender Brown, Ron wouldn't have realized that he really cared about Hermione, right? And Hermione wouldn't have realized it either. They both were in denial because they'd been friends for so long.
And they also fight way too much.
and they fight a lot.
Really annoying.
And so as a result, both didn't realize they cared about each other until Lavender Brown came along. She actually served an incredibly important role because without her, they probably never would have gotten together. That is my theory, personally. But so
you're
flat
saying-
characters can help bring characters together, can help tear people apart.
I think you said black characters. I'm like,
I also did.
Flat characters, flat like paper. Specify.
like black characters can rip people apart.
Well, I mean, technically, so can white people. All right, anyone can rip
White
someone
shirts.
apart theoretically.
I'm
but
concerned
anyway.
how this
Moving on.
conversation turned.
So flat characters can rip relationships apart or bring relationships together, and they can highlight certain aspects of people. For example, if you have a bunch of people come across a soothsayer in the woods, right? And she's just like, I can tell you your fortunes. And one person's like, I'm a
Soothsayer?
Yeah, soothsayer.
Soothsayer?
Yes,
I would-
that's what it's called when they tell your fortune.
Personally,
It's not a fortune teller. Fortune teller's technically the wrong term.
Personally, I wouldn't trust
People
anyone
just started
in
doing
the
that.
woods.
Exactly.
But-
But see,
Just
that's
like-
how a flat character can help characterize a round character. Because if you're not trusting them, that shows you're a skeptic, right? Whereas if someone's like, ooh, tell me my future, and sits down right in front of her and
They're
gets all
just
cozy,
oblivious.
But I
they're
would use
naive,
girl.
or they're oblivious, or they
Or they actually
just have
or
no
they're,
mind.
they're,
And then
they're
the
the white girl who's
soothsayer
really into
takes
astrology.
out
Who's really into astrology. It shows you different aspects of the character. Or maybe the person's skeptic just because they're like, I don't trust people.
Because this soothsayer killed my grandmother.
Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, so yeah, have any of you seen Kung Fu Panda 2? They call
Of
her
course.
Soothsayer. That's the goat. They call her a soothsayer.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I don't care about the flipping goat. She has a bowl. That's it. That's the only thing. She has a
Anyway,
bowl.
so I'm just surprised that this term has completely almost died.
It's like
It's dead as wine, okay? It's dead as
Because
Twitter.
people,
Twitter's
it's
dying.
like
all
with
want to
frisbees.
do their own thing.
I'll just solve in the corner over here.
It's like with
Yeah,
frisbees. They weren't originally called frisbees, but as everybody decided, they're frisbees. Thus they're frisbees. As
That
such,
is
it
valid.
is the actual term. As such, fortune teller is the actual word as well.
I
What?
still debate that. But yes, I see your point. I see your point at least. Even if I will still not call it a fortune teller because I'm sad. I like soothsayer. Anyway, so.
Yeah, but it is technically the right word.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely still the right word. Fortune teller is absolutely still the right word. And I would not, yeah. I don't have any disagreements for you using fortune teller. All right.
Sounds like you do.
No, I'm just saying I
Teller
like
of fortune.
soothsayer, but
We're
it
just
sounds
lengthening your
fancier.
video by like 10 minutes.
All right, but it sounds fancier in my opinion. Anyway, so round and flat characters can play off each other really well, and it helps kind of elaborate on both their qualities. All right, now we already talked about conflict, but let's specify. Internal versus external, and yes, you do need both. Because if you only have internal conflict, your story can't really move forward. If you only have external conflict, we know nothing about your character now. So you need both. We need internal so we get to know your character more, so we can feel more in depth into the story, into the character. But we need external because we need to have the conflict. We literally need the conflict to conflict with the other conflict. Yes, I said conflict a lot.
Conflict.
Because your internal goal might be, I am going to I don't know if you're a villain. I'm gonna destroy or conquer the
I'm
world.
going to punt that dog so hard it goes through.
No. Yes, okay, let's just go with the evil dog kicker. Alright, so
And
they
no one
want to
gets
kick
their dog
dogs
that's
and
not
just
evil.
think all dogs deserve to die, and they're like, haha.
What about my Victor?
I don't know, but for some
Alive.
reason this is the villain we've come up with. Alright, so that's the internal, that's the external conflict where they're like, people are trying to stop them from killing all the dogs because they like dogs, and they're like, but I want to kill all the dogs.
But nobody likes dogs.
Whereas the internal conflict is that secretly they own a Pomeranian that they absolutely adore, so they want all dogs to die but that Pomeranian, and they're like, no,
They're
no,
making a
that's
dog
not how it
killing
works.
machine, but they can't kill that one dog.
Exactly.
Hypocrite. That's what the villain is.
They're only killing innocent dogs. I don't think they care about being a hypocrite.
Anyway, so the point being that their internal conflict and external conflict have to clash. So for example, I don't want to use Percy Jackson because some of you haven't read it. I'm going to use Harry Potter just because the movies. So even if you haven't read the books, I'm sorry. The internal conflict of Harry Potter is that he just wants to be normal. Honestly.
I
At
wanna be
heart,
a normal
he just
boy.
wants to be normal.
That's the first book.
That's fair. I'm just going with the first book. He just wants to be normal. He just wants to be a regular kid. He just wants to go to Hogwarts and enjoy himself, right? The external conflict is the fact that there's all this creepy, kooky stuff going on at Hogwarts, and Voldemort might be back, right? And so it keeps conflicting with his ability to just try and be normal in that first book. Am I wrong?
1991 to 1997 is like the most dangerous years ever at Hogwarts.
Oh, yeah, that's fair. All right, but yeah, so it feels, it conflicts, right? It doesn't work together. Or a lot of times characters will be like, I just want to be loved, but their internal conflict is that they feel that they are unlovable because they are too anxious or too depressed. That often happens with mental health, right? That's hard. And so they feel like, I'm too flawed, how could anyone ever love me? That's an internal conflict that conflicts with their external conflict of being like, I found this great person, I want to be with them, but I can't because of internal conflict. And so kind of, you see what I mean? Does this make any sense?
Yeah.
Perfect. Sometimes I talk myself into a corner and then I'm like, that didn't make any sense. So I like to clarify with the other humans who I'm talking to. All right. All right. All right. So, one second, I'm going to mark where we are on here. Okay. So you need to show them in diverse situations. Why? Because you're never going to have them in the same situation all the time. Even if it's a realistic fiction and the whole idea is by the end of the novel they want to go to the prom or whatever.
Unless it's one of those books where it's a time loop.
Unless it's a time loop, but even then,
The
it's still,
situations are going to turn
the
out different.
situations
They
are
start
going to
the
turn out
same, but they
differently.
stop.
They start to, yes, exactly.
That's
So
not
you-
like time loop then, though.
Yeah, no,
So-
usually the point of those stories is you have
Yeah.
to change something.
You have to change something until you get it right. Like, until you just keep going through it.
I'm just gonna
Do the same
Really a
way until
time
you get it
loop.
right. Yeah. I mean, it is technically a time loop because you're starting the same day over, and it's technically the same day because it all happens the same. It's just how you react to it.
Yeah, but it's
differently.
not, time's not looping over on itself, it's just being sent back. It's not really a loop of time. A loop would imply it always goes in a circle, there's no branching or anything, or different changes. Thus, it would be a time, like, break or skip. Not
Well,
really
all I
time
know
loop.
is that it's called a time loop, so feel free to argue with the people who call it that, but I agree.
I will.
But I agree with you. I agree with you. It's technically not a loop, but that's just what it's called. So if you want to go find the person who originally called it a time loop and have a debate, please by all means do. But unfortunately, I cannot argue with that logic. That is sound logic. It's technically not a time loop. Anyway, so that being said, make sure that they have diverse situations because that diverse situation is going to help show them over time being a different person, right? You're never going to have the same school day twice. Sure, you might go to all the same classes, but one day you might have someone throw a wad of paper at you that says, do you like me? Or the next day you might have someone say like, hey, I want your apple at lunch, and you're like, but you can't have my apple.
Like,
And
well,
you're
it's too
stuck.
bad. Squirts hand
Squirts
sanitizer
hand
in your
sanitizer in your
eyes.
eyes. Yeah, that's going to be a
That's
totally
just
different day.
painful.
Yes.
Technically, if like the entire universe went in a loop, like at
Oh,
like, the
man, that
very
would hurt.
end, like they time travel to the beginning,
Oh, gosh.
and like there's an explosion that caused the Big Bang and the creation of everything,
That would hurt.
it would just be going forever and ever and ever.
All the time series. Oh, my brain broke. All right.
That's
So with diversity of situation, it's going to help ensure that your character is fully well-rounded because you're not just having the same stuff happen every day. You're making sure that they are becoming a different person and maturing through these different events that they are going through. All right. Next thing. All right. This one is actually one that I didn't find online, but that I heard at a conference, and I love it. Shannon Messenger, I believe is her name. So, secrets. One thing that she said, and I completely agree with this, from a psychological standpoint, there's always one thing that someone doesn't want to tell someone. Am I wrong? Like,
Yeah.
even the closest people, there might be people where you're like, I have a singular secret from you, right? Like some people you have absolutely no secrets with, but that's usually about 2 people, right? It's not the whole population. You're not telling everyone. By the way, like you generally have 1 or 2 people that you have no secrets with, right? And so it's important, your characters are the same way. They have 99% of the population is completely unaware of this secret. Maybe even their closest friends are unaware of this secret until they discover it later and they stumble across it. You know? That can really help give an idea of what the character values, right? Because if their secret is that they have anxiety, but they're really, really good at masking it, and they don't want anyone to know that anything's wrong, so they don't tell anyone that they have anxiety. That shows what they value, right? They value looking good in society more than they do their own mental health.
Or they do like worry about their own mental health, but their parents are forcing them to mask.
Yeah, or there's that, where it's
And that's where the anxiety is coming from.
yes, or they have parents who aren't treating them right, and so that's their secret, is that they're being abused, but they don't want to tell anyone. They're too busy trying to keep this smile on their face. That's a secret. Or maybe their family's really, really wealthy, but they don't want to tell anyone because they're afraid people might look at them differently and think that they're somehow, better than them, or that the popular kids might be like, oh, let's be friends with you just because you're rich, So there's all sorts of different reasons that people can keep a secret, and it really shows a lot about their character. I recommend that if you're creating a character, write down at least 1, if not 2 or 3 secrets, and make a list. Who knows about it? Who doesn't? And why?
Yeah, that's going to be a long list with my story.
So, well, when I say and who doesn't, you can say like, this person knows, no one else knows. Like you can do shortcuts if there's a lot of people who don't know. But then, why does the one person who does know? Why do they trust them with that?
Because they're just smarter.
Because they're the therapist.
Because they're their therapist. All right. So, I know this is an obvious one, but we got to talk about it. Stereotypes.
Mary Jane.
Yes. So, with stereotypes, the issue is not the stereotype. The issue is that they become, that is all they are. And when I say no stereotypes, I mean all the stereotypes. Gender, I'm thinking gender, I'm thinking blondies, I'm thinking sexuality, I'm thinking race. There's a lot of different stereotypes out there, right?
Like the entirety of Hogwarts?
Yes, it's actually fair. It has a lot of stereotypes, absolutely. And I think that stereotypes can be beneficial for background characters, but if they have any sort of actual relevance to the plot, you should not stereotype. They should
What
have
do
a
you mean?
genuine depth. Let me explain.
Sports job.
So, for example, stereotype. If I was to put myself in a stereotype that people would put me into, it would be the ditzy blonde, right? I have long blonde hair. I barely remember stuff most of the time because I'm ADHD. But granted, if people didn't know I was ADHD, they'd think I was just a ditz, right? That would probably be the stereotype that someone would put me into. But there's so much more to me than just being a blonde who is a ditz.
And it's like ginger. That's become a stereotype.
No, it's true. Ginger's become a stereotype that they're this feisty, crazy,
Or
passionate
they're just
people.
Ed Sheeran.
I know.
They're Ed
I know they're
Sheeran.
just
I
Ed
just
Sheeran.
realized that my main character is
Literally Ed
blonde.
Sheeran.
that she is very
We
intelligent.
call like
Yes,
four
exactly.
different people.
So you're
in
not
one
She's
falling
group.
into a stereotype.
nothing like a
Like all-
stereotype.
But yes,
all
and there's
kids
a
were
lot
there
of
with
stereotypes,
the
and
ball
then
and shit.
there's also a lot of stereotypes that the LGBTQ community is talking about
For
now.
example, the gay fashion dude.
Oh,
Not
yes.
every gay dude is
Not
like
every
that.
gay dude is
And
like that.
I'm non-binary, and I'm not like totally gender non-conforming. I
Oh,
love
yeah.
girly stuff.
You wanna-
Yes, no, it's absolutely true. There's someone I follow on Instagram who's non-binary, and she loves dressing up in
She?
cosplay. Sorry, well,
They.
My apologies. That was just a slip because they dress up as Princess Peach all the time, so I didn't know they were non-binary until
That's true.
after. That's why I said that, because I didn't know until like this week. So my apologies. I just learned that this week. Yes.
Do you want to hear a funny story? I was in history class,
Mhm.
right? So we were talking something about the Secret Development, but basically it's like, you know, they use the Red Scare to go against like, you know, all sorts of different people. Like the elf like tries to say it,
Them
just
queers.
completely butchers it,
Yeah.
wrong letters, everything, and nobody else notices.
No
I
one-
just start dying of
no
laugh.
one-
I'm in the front row. He looks. I'm just like, I got that wrong.
That was my bishop. That was my bishop.
But yes, so, and I'm currently actually editing a story that this person has done absolutely beautifully with. But they have a character who is they them, who is non-binary, non-gender conforming. However, what I love about they them is that they love to dress up in slightly masculine things, but that doesn't make them any less non-binary.
If only people could get that.
Yes. And so it's like, no, yeah, it's fair. And so, yeah, like I said, it's just the fact that I just learned with the other they them this week. So I feel bad about calling them a her, but that's just because I just learned like 2
You're
days
like,
ago.
this person,
Yeah.
I have no
I had no
idea.
Yeah, I had no idea until just the other.
You want to hear a kind of funny story about
Sure.
like knowing that type of gendery thing,
Yeah,
right?
gender is
So I've got this cousin Charlie, right?
Yeah.
And I've got no clue. I'm like, there's like a 50% chance of trans, but I cannot remember.
I
Or
cannot
like-
figure it out. I cannot.
I'm like, it's possible. I don't freaking remember. So I'm on their Instagram, and I'm just like, I have no clue.
You're like, this isn't helping.
You're
Yeah.
like
And it's
17
just-
hours
I'm
of
trying to
Facebook
figure it
research
out.
doesn't
Yes,
help
no,
that.
it's true, it's true. Especially in today's day society. But a lot of times,
I just can't for the life of me remember. It's like, this has been brought up before. I just cannot remember.
But yeah, so with this being said, it is considered a societal thing. Now that a lot of people deal with race, deal with gender, deal with sexuality, all with these stereotypes. And they're like, oh, so a butch woman has to love a feminine lesbian. No,
This is not
absolutely
how it
not.
works.
That's not how that works. Yeah,
Everything is a social construct if you look far enough.
Yeah, because it's social construct.
It
Well,
is.
like, same thing with, like I said, the blondes. Just because I'm blonde doesn't mean I'm a ditz. Just because I love art doesn't mean that it's my whole personality.
Don't stereotype minorities,
Or just-
especially gender. You're not gender.
Don't
Ginger.
stereotype
Ginger.
it.
Ginger, poor ginger.
Gingers.
But yes, and then there's also
But
a lot
gingers
of,
don't have souls, so it's okay.
What?
Anyway, so, and then there's also racial stereotypes, like, for example, Asians. A lot of Asians get stereotyped as you have to be good at math.
Like, or you have
And
to
that
be
is
like
not fair.
super successful.
You have to be super
educated.
successful, super educated, and it's like, no. No.
I'm just questioning why. What is this math thing?
Exactly. It doesn't make sense that people put them in boxes, but they did. And now those boxes are just a box. Or like Gothic kids. All Gothic kids are
All
like
goth, yeah. It's like, I feel nothing in my soul. No,
It's like, no.
The elf community is actually extremely rich and valuable.
Oh yes,
It's
absolutely.
cute.
I completely
Well,
agree.
yeah, you seen those boots? They gotta be rich to afford them.
Seriously. Anyway, point being that you should not stereotype in your novel unless they are a flat character. If they're a flat character, that's fine. But that's because they have no real value to the story then aside from to pop in, do their job, and then leave. Whereas if they are a villain, if they are a secondary character, if they are a main character especially, you do not want to put them in a stereotypical box unless the whole point is that you're proving against the stereotype. For example, Legally Blonde. The whole point of that was that she was was that
Legally Blonde.
she's a blonde ditz. That the whole thing is she's like I
And
can
she figures out
screw you.
she figures out a murder case because of
Because
the
the
blonde
guy was
dude's
gay.
Yes,
knowledge.
exactly. And so it's like
I did see this one actually.
yes. So as a result, if you're gonna do a stereotype, you have to be proving the stereotype wrong. If you're gonna do something like that with a main
Okay.
character, that's all I will say on that. It's not helpful unless you're proving it wrong.
Dude,
All right.
the jock
So,
popular
last one.
love interest is so overused. It's actually ridiculous.
All right.
We're going for this.
When you keep on talking about stereotypes, I think of Dude Perfect because they do
Yes.
stereotype
Yeah.
videos.
What is our last thing?
All right. X
French
is not their
people.
personality. So fill in the blank. So a lot of people have started doing this, and it's actually really bothering different races, different sexualities, because they're so desperate to fit diversity in that they're forcing it in places where instead of just having a natural character who's fully well-rounded, who's fully fits, and they're a they/them character, for instance, they're like, it's their whole personality.
Yeah, no, my whole
It's their
personality
only
is
point in existing. And it's like, what? They're a person. They're not gonna just be their sexuality or just their gender. I'm not just a lady. Just because I'm a lady, my whole point is to be a woman.
You're like,
That's not.
you're like,
that's not how this works.
maternal feelings and long hair. That's not, no.
No. Like, yes, I want to be a mom one day, but that's not my whole personality.
You're like, that would be good, but I like books. You could have talked to me about books.
Exactly. I have other interests. It's not my only aspect of me. Yes.
I wouldn't use well-rounded or character type thing because that implies equalness in everything, and there is no equalness of
Oh no,
character.
absolutely not. When I say well-rounded, I mean it in the literary definition of they have to have diverse aspects to them that aren't just one thing.
Yes.
That's what I mean when I say well-rounded. So fill in the blank. This can be a sexuality, this can be a gender, this can be a race, but it cannot be their personality. So for example, one of the things I shouldn't use that as an example. Not enough people have seen it. All right.
What?
But I was gonna say the new Into Spider-Verse movie, but that was.
I love that movie.
I'm not gonna say anything. I'm not gonna say anything.
That
That
one
makes
makes
me
me
furious at them right now.
So yes.
That's not
anyway.
good. You should get that
Yes.
checked out.
So, if you have a character from a different religion or a different race, you need to make sure that they are well-rounded as a person, that they have flaws, they have issues, they live a life, they have quirks. They don't just,
Well,
I
I
am the African American character. Yay!
Oh my gosh! In like the
That's
80s,
not
the
the
80s
point.
kid friend group where it was like the kid in the wheelchair, the Asian kid, the ginger,
Yes.
the black kid. Like,
Yes, they're
like,
just filling
for
a
example,
stereotypical role.
Magic
They're not
School
actually.
Bus.
Yes, that's fair.
Yeah.
Sad.
Sad, but Magic School Bus was good. So
But yes. So anyway.
School Bus was a good show.
So did anyone have a question?
No?
Okay. I just thought I saw a raised hand. So you just need to make sure that when you're doing personalities, they have a personality that has quirks, that has flaws, that has all these different things. And it's not just their sexuality or their gender or their race. With that being said, if you don't know a specific race, sexuality, or gender, you might do this on accident. This is why a sensitivity reader or just an editor who's really good with sensitivity stuff is important. And that's because you want to make sure that you're not accidentally falling into something stereotypical. Because it can happen. If you don't know what it's like to be gender fluid, if you don't know what it's like to be a man, in my case,
You're like, I don't know.
then
You're like testosterone.
I'm like, I've actually been told I'm really good at writing men, but that's mainly because of the fact that I grew up with only one brother and me. And so as a result, like, my whole world was basically, I have a bro.
Like, hey, bro.
So, like, that was just part of who I was. And so I write men really well because I grew up with a guy who was pretty similar in age with me, and we did everything together. And so it was great, but it meant that I write guy characters better than some people I know who only have sisters. Because it's hard to write a guy character when you don't really interact with guys.
And I have no siblings. Yay!
And having no siblings can be hard too, because then you're trying to write sibling relationships when you've never
Oh,
had a
I
sibling.
saw a thing
That's
that was
hard
like,
too.
it was a PNG, it was like a stock image of this guy drinking something, and it was like, can I write it on the board? Actually, after your video, and so
Okay, I was like,
keep that
okay.
in mind. You're like, where
Sorry,
is
I
this
got
going?
distracted. But yes, so I would say do research if you don't know a point of view. And if you don't do your research, then make sure that you absolutely have an editor go over it, just to make sure that you don't accidentally fall into a stereotype. Yes?
I think that's a really good idea.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the reasons that, like, for my story that
Yeah.
I was doing for the summer contest, I made sure to get editors and
Yes.
like, other people reading over it, because it was like, I have 5 sisters and 3
Mhm.
brothers.
Yeah.
So I am very very much in touch with the female personality.
But not so much the masculine
But
personality.
yes,
Yes.
I don't really know what that's like, so it was, when I was first writing it, it was kind of like, I feel like I'm falling into a stereotypical male here.
Yeah.
Because
And that is hard, for
I
sure.
just don't really know what it's like, so it was helpful to get some tips from like family members and friends and stuff.
Yes, absolutely.
Because they
You did a great
knew-
job as far as I can tell. That's good you did research because I thought you did a great job. So
They just had a lot more to say about like, oh yeah, you know, guys have these other qualities, or you know,
yeah.
sometimes.
Or I feel like a guy wouldn't really probably do this or things
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that because it's very important to get point of views from those other points of views, and that's part of the reason why I mentioned at the beginning. If you're doing mental health, if you're doing a different sexuality, different gender,
Oh,
get
and
at
don't
least-
stereotype mental health, mental illnesses.
That's why you have to do
Well,
at
it makes
least
me curious
talk
when
to at
people do
least
that.
5
Isn't that what
I have-
diagnosis is though for them? It's stereotyping them down.
All right. So hold on. Just one last thing. So talk to at least 5 people. And I know I mentioned this at the beginning, but it's very important. If you're doing something else, definitely do like Eleora did and talk to at least 5 other people who fit within that category, whatever that category is, so you can get a diverse idea of how to put this character together. All right. If you have any more questions, now would be the time. But if not, I'm going to stop the video. Okay, perfect. Oh, and Writers Club entries, speaking of that, just before I close out the video, so I make sure to mention this, are due on Thursday before 8:45 p.m. And yes, it has to be before, not a minute later, because of the fact that we close at 9 and my coworkers don't want to have to stay after. So it's 8:45 and not a minute later.
How long does it have to be again?
It has to be a minimum of 1,500 words. I believe I set the maximum at 6,000. So it's a good range. It just has to be a minimum of 1,500 because I believe, in my personal opinion, I've run
Wait,
into a
what was
lot
the
of
maximum?
6,000. I've run into a lot of people who tend to underwrite and more than overwrite, and so that's why I set the minimum. Is because that way it kind of helps prevent the underwriting.
I one time went over it was 6th grade, went over the limit of how long you could write. So
That's awesome.
the assignment, guess how long the assignment was?
5 pages.
No, half a page. This was
Half a
6th
page.
grade.
Wow.
This was 6th grade. We weren't doing anything intensive.
Yeah.
Guess how many pages I wrote?
A lot.
7.
Bit more.
Oh, actually, okay. But yeah, so the point is that it's due, and it's going to be this Thursday, 8:45 p.m. on the dot. I've told all my coworkers if it is later than 8:45 p.m. by even a minute, does not count. I've told them all that. So they're not being mean. It's my own fault. I told them that. So
So
what if
what
it's
you're saying